Hey folks, welcome to today's mini booth gathering. It's good to be with you. It always is. This is, among other things, the first week of Advent. For those who follow along with the liturgical calendar, the Christian traditional liturgical calendar, Advent, of course, is a time of waiting. I tend to think about Advent as sort of like Lent with evergreens, Lent with Christmas decorations. It's a time of naming our longings. It's a time to keep hope in view, but not to rush to the end of the story. Because if we rush to the end of the story, we don't get all the gifts that we would otherwise get if we take every step of the journey. Some of those gifts feel obvious and welcome, others less so. And today we're going to explore one that might not feel like a gift. We're going to explore suffering. So we're gonna dig into that this week, and then next week we will look at Advent from a different perspective. Jessica's going to be along in just a moment with some music, and then we're going to consider a psalm that I am betting no one has ever suggested to you that you should memorize. All right, so that's where we're headed. But first, Jessica.
Feel my hurt.
Thanks, Jess. I really appreciate that Jessica and Darla have both taken the time in the middle of the other things that are on their plates to make some music at home and send it our way so we could include that in these videos. I really miss making music and singing together with the community, and this is just a little taste of that, so that's delightful. We all suffer, and we kind of know that in our heads. It's easy to say. If we didn't know it before, or we didn't acknowledge it before, we are now living in the midst of a pandemic, a gigantic global illustration of this human commonality. Having said that, we all suffer. We don't all suffer the same, and injustice, it would seem, didn't suddenly take a day off when it comes to pandemics. As is often the case, COVID hits the vulnerable the hardest. And there's a few different ways we could look at that. I would say that if we are watching this video right now at a time of our choosing, in a place that feels relatively safe, on a screen that we think of as our own or we have fairly unhindered access to, I would say we're part of a pretty privileged group of people in context. I'm making this video for a post-secondary educational community, also a privileged group of people. And yet, we also suffer. Some would say that those that have faith in God should not suffer, at least if their faith is strong or strong enough. I think that the authors of Psalm 88 would disagree. Psalm 88 may be the most unrelentingly dark chapter in the Bible. It is almost certainly the darkest of the Psalms. It's the lyrics from a song. That probably shouldn't come as a big surprise, given that it's fairly dark. There's nobody quite like a songwriter to really augur into the angsty darkness without apology and without backing down. I do not recommend reading this psalm if you're already feeling like you're in a dark place, any more than I would suggest listening to some contemporary singer-songwriter equivalent of it, unless you just really want to go there, or unless you think you might find it helpful to be reminded that you are not alone in your suffering. There's a reason why some pretty dark artists have millions of fans, and I think there's a reason that's more powerfully common to humanity than an attraction to any particular aspect of their music or their songwriting. One way to name that reason is to acknowledge that we need to know that we don't suffer alone. And we need to know that in human terms, and we need to know it in God terms, let's say, as well. We need to know that no matter how dark things get, we have not been abandoned, that we've got company on the journey. So when a band like the Sons of Korah, the name of the musicians who wrote this thing, write a lyric like Psalm 88, and they write lyrics like this, and this is from Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of the message, but this is from Psalm 88. So listen to this. Opening stanza of the song. I've had my fill of trouble. I'm camped on the edge of hell. I'm written off as a lost cause. One more statistic, a hopeless case, abandoned as already dead, one more body in a stack of corpses, and not so much as a gravestone. I'm a black hole in oblivion. So imagine the Sons of Korah penning this lyric, and then they take it and they give it to the church worship band, and they say, come up with a tune for this one, let's do it on Sunday. When something like that happens, because that's what happens with this psalm. They write the lyric and they give it to the director of music. When something like that happens, we know we've got company in our suffering, right? Personally, for lyrics like that, if I'm thinking about this worship band kind of going, well, what would serve the song well? This is not a 3-chord strum along. This is pretty heavy. And I think it's kind of grindcore, actually. Like it's really heavy, and probably the kind of song that if you did it in most churches, anytime, never mind on a Sunday morning, the worship director just might have some unhappy emails by the end of the day. But here's the thing. Lots of psalms of lament, psalms of suffering, end with some kind of an affirmation of faith, some kind of, but I'll trust in you statement. This one doesn't. This one ends with this line, the only friend I have left is darkness. The only friend I have left is darkness. It's a great fit with I'm a black hole in oblivion, right? Of the 18 verses of this psalm, only the first half of the first verse is about anything other than darkness. It starts with, God, you are my last chance of the day. That's the bright spot in this psalm. When I really spend some time with this psalm, there's a personal experience that comes to mind. I once had occasion to go with a group of people and a guide into a fairly deep cave. And I don't know if you've ever had a chance to do any spelunking or caving, but at the risk of saying something obvious, it's really dark in there. And just to illustrate the profundity, the thoroughness, the completeness of the darkness, at one point we had headlamps and some other sources of light, and we were sort of exploring this cave. But at one point, the guide turned off all those lights. And it is the only time in my life that I can ever remember being in a place that was so dark that when I moved my hand in front of my face, I couldn't see it. I could feel the air movement. I could blow on it with my breath, and I could feel the warmth of the breath on my hand, but my hand might as well have not been there. I could not see my own hand. Totally dark. When I think about a psalm like this, I think about entering into a season like Advent, a season of waiting, of longing, of naming those things in the midst of a pandemic, which is stretching on, you got to say at this point. And I think about the light of God, you're my last chance of the day. You know, I don't think about that big, bold, white candle statement that we usually light when we're together. I didn't light it this morning on purpose. I didn't light it because, not because the idea has gone away, not because the affirmation has gone away, but because I wanted to recast the symbol a little bit. We light that candle to remind us that bidden or unbidden, God is present, whether we feel it or don't feel it, whether we sort of have it in view or not. This is a thing we affirm, that God is present, including in the depths of suffering, including when we feel like a black hole in oblivion. When I think about that affirmation, God, you're my last chance of the day, this is what it feels like to me. It feels more like lighting one of these. It's a little birthday candle. Not like that big white one we usually light. It's just this tiny little thing. And I feel like a statement like that in the middle of suffering is this kind of light. If I had lit this candle in that cave when all the rest of the lights were out, this light would have felt enormous, because it would have reminded all of us, it would have made it possible for all of us to understand that where there is any light, there is not all darkness. Where there is any light, we cannot say, this is just dark. We can say, God, you're my last chance of the day. Right? Sometimes this, a reminder that points to light, that points to hope, that points to love that isn't afraid of the dark, sometimes this is all we've got. Sometimes this is all we need. I hope that our time together this morning has reminded you that no matter how dark it feels in your world, in your experience, in this time of waiting, it's not all dark. The bidden or unbidden, the light of God is present. And that can sometimes be all the light we need. Peace, everybody. We'll look at Advent from another perspective next week. For now, my hope is that the light of Christ will be sufficient for the day. Bye for now.